class in another building. So thank you for being patient with me. Today, we're going to go over kind of pitch deck 101, how to basically build out the raw structure of a pitch deck, what the objectives of a pitch deck might be, and how to convey the primary ideas like for a pitch deck. If you guys don't know me, my name is Sybil Yang. My home department is actually with the Department of Hospitality and Tourism Management within the Lamb Family College of Business. But I also run the Innovation and Entrepreneurship program for the College of Business and across the university. So the Innovation Hub that you see here, the incubator programs, all the pitch competitions, they all kind of go through innovation and entrepreneurship. So if you're ever curious about any of the kind of entrepreneurship-y type of opportunities that are on campus, you know where to find me. My contact information will be at the end of the deck, and Marco also has my information. ACM does as well. So, okay, without kind of further ado, I'll kind of go through a little bit of the opportunities that are still open for the remainder of this semester. Incubator accepts applications on a rolling basis. So whenever you're ready with your idea, feel free to apply to Incubator, and it's our concept incubator on campus. You don't need a full pitch deck in order to apply for Incubator. You really just need an idea and kind of the well thought out part of your idea. So a little bit of evidence and a lot of passion to apply to Incubator. We also have pitch competitions that we arrange. So this is part of a workshop preparation series for the CS pitch competition, which is going to be coming up March 22nd. And then there's also a university-wide pitch competition as well. And that's going to be happening on April 12th. The deadline to submit to the university-wide pitch competition is towards the end of March. So you still have a little bit of time to go ahead and put that one together. San Francisco State also participates in the CSU's pitch competition. So that's across the 23 campuses of the CSU. Different prizes, different prize level for that. And we get to send two pitch team representatives to the CSU level. And that'll be down in Dominguez Hills. And the university will sponsor travel for you guys for that one too. Outside of the incubator and pitch competitions, we also offer consulting and advising through the Innovation Hub over here. So I provide business advising. So business models, revenue models, market segmentation, marketing research type of stuff. We also have technical advising. This semester it's every Wednesday, anytime from 9 to 5 o'clock. We have a CS alum who is versed, kind of a jack of all trades, a little bit of everything within the technical realm. So if you plan on building games, if you plan on doing a little 3D, if you plan on doing a little, database-ish based stuff, he can help guide you in the right direction on that type of stuff. We also provide legal consulting also. So Mark Ciatola, he is a JD MBA who is on staff in the design department, and he has open legal office hours. And you can also book legal office hours with him on Discord. So I highly recommend that you guys sign up for the INE Discord. We post all of the opportunities onto the Discord first, and that's kind of the best way to kind of keep in contact with the INE community without having to always show up to the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Hub over here. Okay, that being said, let's kind of delve a little into pitch decks. So these are some of the concepts that Incubator has sponsored in the past, and we've helped them curate their pitch decks so that on an internal basis, they've had a lot of success at the San Francisco State level pitch competition, but they've also had some success outside of the San Francisco State campus. So on the CSU level, and then also with angel and seed investors as well. Okay. Who is this pitch deck for? The pitch deck is used for all sorts of audiences. Most people think it's just for investors, like you're going to pitch in order to get investment money in. But oftentimes when you sign up new partners, or if you're trying to find a co-founder, and you need to explain what your concept does and why you're worth partnering up with, everybody asks for your pitch deck. And so think about employees and other co-founders that you want to bring on, partners, development partners, customer partners, beta partners that you want to bring on. They're going to want to see your pitch deck. And then, of course, the investor community. So whether it's friends and family, angels, seed, or VC level, they all want to see a pitch deck of some sort. So what is the pitch deck? Slide deck, PowerPoint, whatever, Google Slides, whatever. It could be, 30 seconds long, 5 minutes long, 7, 10 minutes long, whatever. Kind of the sweet spot that most people are looking for in terms of a pitch deck is about 5 minutes in length. So if you can't explain and convince people within that 5-minute span, you need to understand your concept better, and you need to understand your solution better. Okay, so whatever you're aiming for, aim for about 5 minutes. I know that's not a slide count, and that's purposefully not a slide count either, because depending on how you design your slides, how you design your presentation, how you use the slides, 5 minutes can mean, 30 slides, or it can mean 2 slides, Gesundheit, right? So think about the time that it takes you to explain yourself as opposed to the number of slides you're going to use in order to explain yourself. The slides are in service to whatever it is that you're saying, okay? Build the slide deck so that it can stand alone, like without you, in case somebody asks for, a soft copy of your deck and you're not there to be able to speak to it. But you should also have a version that's designed to accompany you talking in front of an audience as well. Okay, what are the objectives of your pitch deck? You want to inform people about what problem in the marketplace you're trying to address. And you're trying to convince them that your solution is gonna be correct in addressing that problem. On the inform part, you're also trying to inform them that this problem is worthy of solving, meaning that it's interesting enough, it is big enough, and it is juicy enough from a market perspective that, it's going to be worth people's while for you to solve it, either from a monetary standpoint, an ethical standpoint, or whatever. You have to convince people not only that the problem exists, but that the problem is worth solving. And then that second part, you need to convince them that your solution is achievable and that it will actually do what you say it's going to do. So it's a sell job in that sense. And the last thing that the pitch deck is supposed to do is it's supposed to articulate some form of call to action. So again, depending on who you're pitching this pitch deck to, right? Whether it's another potential founder that you're trying to bring on, or if it's a development partner, or if it's a beta customer, or if it's an investor, you need to clearly say what you want from them. And that can be inside the pitch deck. So if it's meant for investors and you want them to invest, have some terms on there, right? Like, what type of deal are you looking for? How much money are you asking for? What are the terms? What are you going to do with that money? If it's going to be a beta partner, maybe what are you asking for from the beta partner? Like, are you asking for data? Are you asking for user feedback cycles? Are you asking for access to their customers or something like that? Be very explicit and clear with what the ask is going to be. Okay, and that's the call to action portion. Honestly, a lot of people, they forget about this. They just think it's a presentation to show off what they're doing, but no, there's a purpose to this pitch deck. Okay, so this inform section. Again, however many slides you need to do this, but the key piece of informing that you need to do is, what do you do? What is your innovation or business about? And this comes two parts on the what you do part. What is the problem? And then what is the solution? That's not to say that they need to exist in the same part of your deck. Just conceptually, you need to convey the message of what is the problem that exists and how are you going to solve it. The second piece of identifying what the problem is you also need to identify who has this problem, right? So what target market segment actually has this segment? Conceptually, when we talk about like who this is, we're not looking for demographics. We're not looking for, you know, Asian female in her 40s type of thing, lives in San Francisco. No. You should be defining the who you're doing this for in terms of what their needs and wants and values actually are. What their value proposition is. What do they care about? Because regardless of what the demographics are, you will find people with the same needs and wants. Again, regardless of demographics. So be very careful when you define who has this problem, right? It's about needs and wants. It's not necessarily about demographics there. Okay. One really good way to convey the what you do part of this is you can tell a story and walk people through a user path. So more entertaining, more visual pitch decks tend to be able to get a picture and a story inside of the audience's head. They can start imagining what this problem looks and feels like. They can start empathizing with the protagonist who has this problem. So you want to be able to walk the audience through this user's path, which means you have to understand how this person is having this problem and then be able to convey it to the audience. When does this problem come up? How do they feel when they have this problem? Do they feel frustrated? Do they feel anxious about it? Do they feel angry about it? And under what contexts? Are they at work? Are they at home? Like everything that you can to draw this picture inside their head of like when this problem occurs, okay? Another way to really inform people about what you do is to kind of use this format of we are X for Y. And you choose X being something that everybody recognizes and knows. So if I say like, I am the Uber Eats for on campus, for like on campus, you know exactly what I mean, right? You can imagine the function that Uber Eats serves, but specifically for campuses, right? Or I can say, I am the Airbnb for bicycles. And you guys get the idea. You guys can get a concept of what I'm doing, right? So this is a really great way to already use people's experience and use that as an easy way to translate whatever it is that you're doing. You have to be a little bit careful though. You have to make sure that the X that you choose is something very recognizable for your audience. You can't say like, you know, we are Uncle Joe's Cafe for dogs or something like that. People won't know what's so special about Uncle Joe, something like that, right? So make sure X is very recognizable. And what makes this interesting is the why part also. Like, why is it so interesting for this market? I probably shouldn't have chosen the letter Y, but why is this so interesting for this new market? Why? Why does this need to exist specifically for this new market now? Is the next thing that people are going to ask. So you need to be ready with that type of response. Okay, so when you're choosing or when you're trying to define whatever your solution set is for a certain target market, you want to be able to clearly articulate what problem you're solving with your solution here. So two pieces to this. So when you identify your problem to the world, you want to make sure that you argue and you convey that the problem you have identified is super popular. Lots of people have this problem, right? Because if it's not a large market, then it's not going to be a very enticing market for people to go after. So that the problem is very popular. Lots of people have it. But it's not only that lots of people have it now. It's a growing population that's going to have this problem. So you don't want to say that you're going to solve a problem for a very stagnant market. You want to be able to demonstrate that a lot of people have it and that population of, you know, problem havers is going to be growing. Okay. You also, and this is a must-have, you must demonstrate that the problem you're trying to solve is urgent in some way. If the problem itself is not urgent, then there is no reason for people to buy or to choose to go out of their way to go with your solution. Meaning they may love your product. Not like people maybe lots of people have this problem. Maybe it's a growing population, but they don't have to buy it now. They can buy it next month. And when next month comes, yeah, I'm a little tight this month on my budget. Like I'll buy it next month. So unless the problem is absolutely urgent, it's never going to happen. So you need to convince people that this problem is urgent, painful enough that people will want to latch onto your solution as quickly as possible. Yeah. So urgency, this one really, really matters. Expensive and mandatory can be almost subsets of urgent. If a problem is expensive enough, meaning that it's costly enough for a person, it's going to be urgent, right? So if you're bleeding money all day long because you have this problem, then yes, it's going to be a very urgent problem for you. This expensive side could also be opportunity cost type of thing. So if I don't do it, my competition's going to do it and they're going to beat me. That could instill a sense of urgency also. It's going to cost them money because it costs them market share also. So when we think of urgency in terms of things being expensive, it can be expensive in that if I don't keep up, I'm going to lose sales then also. I'm going to fall behind. And this could play into FUD. So fear, uncertainty, and doubt is you can put the fear into people that if they don't do it, they're gonna miss out. And that's what makes it urgent. For a lot of consumer goods, we also try to do like FOMO. So kind of the fear of missing out, that creates a sense of urgency also. So, you know, the sense of urgency could be legit or it could be, you know, kind of manufactured also. It just depends on kind of what route you want to take and who that target audience is, if they'll kind of fall prey to it. This mandatory piece, some of the best innovations typically occur when there is a structural change in the way that people do things because it's required now by law. So when HIPAA was implemented in the US, like, so healthcare information protection, like, you know, requirements clicked on, all of a sudden that created a huge demand and a huge urgent need for a lot of management software, enterprise management software. So a great place to look for problems is if there are going to be changes in legislation and structural changes in the way that people start to do things. I know in the food industry within San Francisco, when the pandemic hit, there were huge legal changes in terms of being able to serve to-go alcohol, like to-go consumable alcohol, like already mixed alcohol. And so even that change opened up a large door of possibilities. Okay, this kind of goes towards urgent also, is if a problem happens frequently, because if the problem is always recurring, it's like all the time, it gets expensive, number one, right? But it also stays on the forefront of that market's mind because it's always happening to them. So childcare is one of these things, right? Because people have to go to work every single day. And what do I do with my kid when I go to work every single day? It's a recurring problem. So the more frequently the problem happens, the more urgent it becomes. So one year, and I'll put this, I'll go back, this concept, Politify. Politify, it's kind of a poli-sci based app. It was designed to get people to vote, you know, in a more conscientious way. But the problem with voting is it happens like essentially every 4 years. We just hit like, you know, it kind of happens every 2 years, but most people forget about it in that, like, you know, the 2-year cycle, and it really only happens on the 4-year cycle. And so it doesn't happen all that frequently. And so people are just like, yeah, well, I'll kick the can down the road on that one, right? Like, I'll download the app later on, because, we just finished up the election cycle and I don't even want to think about it until, we're closer to November or something like that. So, make sure that the problem is somewhat frequent. Now, it would be great if you found some sort of problem that hits all of these points. You likely will not find a problem that hits all of these points, right? But you want to be able to demonstrate as many of these things as possible. Because if it hits all of these things, that just makes for a problem that is really ripe to be solved. It is an itch that really needs to be scratched for a certain market. Okay. Here's an example of two of the concepts that incubator backed. One was lupini milk, which is a lupini bean, which is a plant-based milk made from lupini beans. So the idea is a lot of people are allergic to soy. A lot of people don't drink dairy anymore. Almonds are terrible for the environment, just the amount of water that they end up using. And oat milk has this like weird texture to it and is not very like high in nutritional value. Lupini beans are incredibly nutritious. The texture of the milk that comes out of this is really good and really close to dairy milk. And it doesn't have like the barista problems that a lot of alternative milks typically have. And on the environmental side, it is nitrogen fixing. So it can easily go into crop rotations and help repair agricultural lands, as opposed to being a drain on the agricultural lands like almonds might be, and sucking up in terms of sucking up a whole lot of water. They were able to demonstrate that this alternative milk market is very popular because more and more people are allergic to something or they have some form of dietary restriction. And that's just a growing market also. More and more people are expressing their dietary preferences. Is it urgent? Not really urgent. There are already a lot of alternatives that are out there. And it's not like, people are going to drop dead if they don't have a milk alternative out there. So there was a problem with the urgency side. Is it an expensive problem? It could be an expensive problem for consumers, especially if they are regular consumers of a dairy product of some sort. Like people still have their daily coffee with some sort of, milk-ish type of thing. People still cook with some form of dairy. So yeah, if you use it a lot on a regular basis, kind of goes to the frequent side, it can be a very expensive problem to have because alternative milks tend to be a lot more expensive than dairy milks. Is it mandatory? No, right? But this was still a very good concept. Oatly, right? Before, lupini milk, Oatly got sold for billions of dollars. So it is not an urgent problem. It doesn't fit all of these things, but it can still make for a very good concept, right? On the other end, we also have another concept that we backed, which was adrenaline. She was a track athlete. She is a track athlete. And the problem that she identified was that female track athletes, the shorts that they have to wear, they don't fit correctly. Because I guess track athletes, they are shaped very differently. The quads are generally much larger, and the movements that they make, the waistband tends to drop down and the crotch tends to ride up, which for women, it is very, very embarrassing to have that happen. And so as a track athlete, if you do buy something that doesn't ride down and ride up, it's very expensive. Track athletes or professional athletes, they have to practice on a regular basis. So they go through a lot of clothing also. So it is a frequent problem. Every single time they put on something that doesn't fit correctly, they feel it. And it affects their performance. Is it popular? Is it a growing problem? I'd argue about the growing problem part. I'd argue about the popular problem. There aren't a lot of track and field athletes out there, right? Like, that you think are high performance enough to really care about the clothing to be super particular about the clothing that they're picking out. But if you start expanding that, if you think of every single high school in the United States, they probably have some form of track or cross country team going on. And then you expand it to college, right? Then maybe if you think about PE classes or something like that, you can start thinking about adjacent markets that would make for a more popular target market in that sense, right? Lululemon started out very hyper specific in terms of problems that they were trying to solve. Literally, the founder of Lululemon wanted to make women's butts look better in yoga pants. And that was his problem that he was solving. And, you know, the original target market was literally like, you know, women who wanted their butts to look better. And he started out with yoga people. And then he realized, okay, just regular workout women also fall into this category. And so you start expanding the target market set there too. So there you go. You can try to change the target market, change the problem, change the solution to advocate for each one of these points if you want to. Just don't stray too far from the core problem that you're trying to address and the core solution that you've developed. But again, the stronger the argument, the more successful your pitch deck would be. Another concept that we had backed was StomaMate. This was part of our 2022 cohort. And this guy made a stoma filter. It is not a popular problem because not a lot of people go through like a surgery that leaves them with a hole inside of their neck. But it was growing, right? Because there are a lot of different cancers that are out there with the increase of vaping. The likelihood of somebody having to go through this type of surgery, it is growing and it's likely. Was it particularly urgent? Their problem, the problem that they identified, was that it's annoying to use existing stoma filters in there. It's very uncomfortable, right? But these stoma filters, they haven't changed a lot in a very long time. And so people have been living with it for a very long time. They don't use the stoma filter and they've been living with not using the stoma filter for a very long time. One of the reasons why we pursued this idea was when COVID came around, right, it became even more dangerous for people not to wear their stoma filters. And so that made the problem a little bit more urgent, right? Is it expensive? It's a filter. Like, honestly, it's not all that expensive of a piece, right? So it's a relatively cheap piece, even if you don't go through insurance. How do you make it expensive, right? Is if you can make it a subscription service, is if you can get a person to change out their stoma filter more frequently, right? Maybe selling direct to the customer may be relatively cheap, but maybe you can strike a deal on the healthcare facility level, right? And sign a larger contract for bulk packaging on these, and you can make it a relatively expensive problem. It's an expensive problem for somebody who has to buy like, you know, hundreds of thousands of stoma filters, which the healthcare provider would have to do, right? So you can make it an expensive problem to solve. Not a mandatory thing to solve. And then is it a frequent thing to solve? Well, you can make it a frequent problem, right? Maybe people don't use it, and that's why they only buy 1 or 2 a year. But then can you increase the frequency of like stoma exchange? Well, he was like, you know, a lot of times the stoma, I don't know, the sample stoma over there, it's like, you know, this peachy nude color, right? People come in different skin tones, right? So maybe you can have different skin toned versions of the stoma, right? If you go on vacation, maybe you get a tan and you need a different color of that stoma filter or something like that. Maybe you want to just like wear it proud or something like that. And you have like, you know, a gold colored like stoma filter or something like that. You can turn it into a fashion statement then and increase the frequency if you want to. So you can be creative and start thinking about the adjacent products, adjacent services that can help fulfill all the good pieces of a good problem. Okay. Sorry, duplicate slide. Oh, this was here to remind you guys to be very succinct when you do something, when you describe your concept as maybe we are X for Y. And here is a great example of not being succinct. We got this in as as a pitch, as you know, the elevator pitch for a concept. Like this is literally what they submitted. I can give you a couple of reasons, like minutes to read this thing, but realistically, nobody's going to read this. It is just like so much text to try to explain what the hell you're doing. If you kind of break down what they've put into like their description of what they do, I kind of pulled out a couple of parts. Is in blue, they kind of wrote like how they're solving a problem, not what problem they're trying to solve. It's like how they're using context dependent definitions. That's a how they're doing something. Same thing with the yellow. It's another how, right? We solve this problem by taking into account expert reader judgments, right? And contextual usage of a word. That's another how. And then this red piece it's another how. It's like the technical, you know, stuff on how they're doing this. We're using machine learning voting functions to do this. Their explanation of what they do is like all hows. At this point inside a pitch deck, people don't care about how you are solving the problem. You need to sell them on what the problem is first, right? And so here, we literally just simplified down what they do, right? We bring meaning to words you read. That you can already infer from them. There's a problem with us understanding the meanings of words that we read. Like just from that sentence, right? You already know what the problem is, and you already get an idea of what our solution is that we bring meaning to the words that you read, right? So you want to be able to have almost a freaking tagline of what the problem is and what you do. Don't get hung up on all the cool technology behind how you're solving the problem that you've identified. That will come much later on, right? And you get people's attention and curiosity much more when you can actually convey a message as opposed to explain in paragraphs what you're doing. This is terrible for a pitch deck, right? Because nobody's going to read it and it doesn't really communicate much. Be as succinct as possible. Okay. I don't know, how many of you guys have a problem that you already, you know, want to address, that you know you want to kind of solve and innovate for? Yeah, you already have. Okay, good. So you guys already have good ideas. In which case, I won't spend too much time on like how you would identify a good problem. But just realize that you want to start off with a good problem. You'll have this deck later on. So yeah. One of the ways in which you know you have a good problem, though, is you talk with users. The users validate that problem. So you're conducting primary research into that problem. And the most beautiful form of confirmation is when somebody is willing to pay, when somebody writes you a check. Because then they actually have shown to you that, yes, the problem exists. The problem is painful enough where I am willing to give you money for you to make this problem go away. That, if you have that, stick it inside a pitch deck, because that is absolute validation that you have proof of concept, that your concept, the problem, and your solution to that problem, that concept is solid and can start making money already, right? Short of that, short of having somebody write you a check, right? You want to have as much evidence as possible to show that people have this problem and it is bothering them so badly, right? But then again, you know, money talks. So short of getting money in, have either testimonials, right? Have user feedback, have a beta customer, you know, say awesome things about you, have metrics that might be like word of mouth, right? Or intent to renew. Maybe it's survey results that say like 5 stars, love it, yada, 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 right? Intent to return is a great thing.
Just a quick question on that.
Yeah.
When you say, are these things that you would want in the pitch deck, or are you speaking generally about cultivating that here? When you say specifically like testimonials.
in the pitch deck. Yeah, because part of the pitch deck is you want to convince them that you have proof of concept, that your concept will actually work. And honestly, the best proof is, you know, of course, like a hockey stick line that of like number of users who have signed up for your solution, number of users who have paid for your solution, right? Short of that, right? Like maybe you don't have a working product or something. You don't even have an MVP or something like that. Short of that, then you do survey results, right? Like, would you buy this? Or how much are you willing to pay for this, right?
So for ideas that maybe not at the maturity level where they've got that, so there are things like surveys and other things you can do as well.
Yeah, yeah.
To get something out there and put into your pitch deck.
Yeah. So, so signups work. So even if you have brochureware and you're collecting email addresses, like find that, like, you know, sign up here to find out more when we launch type of thing, right? That works also.
Okay, we had this little newsletter and in 2 weeks of just talking about it, we had this many signups.
Yep. A great way is also if you guys do like a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo, like with your idea also, traction on that is really good proof of concept, right? That people are interested enough in the problem and your proposed solution that they're willing to give you some money also. So that's not exactly sales, but that's, and not exactly investment, but that's also traction to show that, you know, this is a market that actually exists. Short of Kickstarter-ness, right? Again, testimonials, survey results from that particular target market, demonstrating willingness to pay, that they're willing to pay, that they're willing to recommend also, and maybe that they're willing to partner or something like that if you're asking for a partnership. So, but you want to show as much commitment from your target market as possible. Survey results, you have to be very careful with conducting surveys because sophisticated partners and investors, they know that you can create a survey to result in whatever you want it to result in. So yeah, that I would say like save as a last ditch effort.
Less value.
Yeah. Another way that you might want to try to get proof of concept is if you can get like experts in the space also to say, and I would say on both sides, you want to show both the demand side, the problem side, and then also the solution side, the technical competency side, right? So if you haven't, so let's say on the demand side, you can go to, you know, potential customers and like say like, hey, can you give me a quote or two of that, you know, this is a problem for us and it's costing us millions of dollars a quarter or something like that. That might help on the demand side. On the solution side and the technical feasibility side, right? Maybe you have to build a widget that does something. You go find the expert in the technology required to build that widget, and you want testimonials from them to say like, yes, I'm ready to be a board member, or I'm ready to mentor these people, or the technology is possible. It's just within grasp or something like that. Because the worst thing that, well, what we see a lot of is what I call world peace ideas. There's no difficulty in showing that there's demand for world peace. The problem is showing the feasibility side, the technical feasibility side. How can you deliver? Can you deliver world peace? Right? If you come back to me and say like, you know, this global leader and this global leader says like, you know, a truce is right around the corner, you know, and I'm willing to advise and negotiate on their behalf or something like that, then I might say like, okay, yeah, they got a good team going on, and that team seems like they have the technical expertise to be able to deliver that solution to you, to me. So short of actually having a working prototype or an MVP of some sort, you can get like heavy hitters.
To sign off on something. Okay, this implementation, I looked at it, it's ambitious, but it's good.
Yeah, I see a clear path for it or something like that. Yeah. But those are really the two big pieces that people are looking for, is that problem is good, and it's going to make money, and that you guys can actually solve it? Excellent question. Yay. Okay. Many of you guys already have a problem. For those of you guys who don't have a problem, let me just say, focus on finding the problem. Don't be married to a technology that you have fallen in love with. Everybody is in love with AI and ML and large language learning models right now. Don't try to find a problem just because you want to program something that has to do with AI. Go the other direction. Start with the problem. And if the problem could use AI as a part of its, structure, then great, right? But you may find that the solution to the problem may not even require the technology that you fell in love with. A lot of times people will just do what I call bullshit buzzword bingo, is they will throw in AI, cloud, social, whatever, just throw it all into there, and it sounds super buzzwordy, and that it should get funding, but it goes to solve absolutely nothing. Nobody has this problem. Nobody has a use case for the solution that you created. Okay. Okay. Part of the convincing part, and we talked about this a little bit, is you want to demonstrate that you can actually do this. We have a lot of ideas for that are contractions, physical goods, and it's a business student that comes up with like the physical good idea. And then I ask, okay, well, so do you have a technical co-founder? Do you have a mechanical engineer working with you? Do you have a CS major working with you? Do you have a chemist on staff with you that you can consult with? And if the answer is no, then I'm just like, so how are you going to get chemistry down? Or how is this new algorithm going to be developed? Where are you going to get this data? So when you start thinking of the solution, start thinking about the components that need to exist for the solution to actually work and be viable, and then start looking for where you're going to get that expertise. So in this sense, a lot of times non CS majors or people who can't code, they'll think, I'm going to go take my problem to a dev shop. I'm going to describe for them what I need this thing to do, and then they're going to code it all for me. And then bada bing, bada boom, I get to keep 100% of my equity. I don't have to share it with like a technical co-founder of some sort, right? Don't do that. Number one, if you don't have the technical expertise to be able to speak intelligently with the dev shop, you're going to do garbage in, garbage out. You can't describe it. They can't build it. They deliver something to you and it's janky and doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Second problem with that is you have no idea how that IP was developed. You have no idea what's underneath the hood. And so if stuff needs to be built on top of it or around it or interact with it again in the future, you have to start all over again on that. So my number one advice for people is to find the right partner. If all you have is the technical expertise, but you're not sure about any of the business things, find a business co-founder. If you're a business person with a great market opportunity, but you have absolutely no technical expertise, go find the technical experts, right? And either have them as your co-founders or have them as your mentors or have them as advisors in some way. But you need to demonstrate on your team that your team can execute this thing. Yeah.
So suppose, for example, I worked in a restaurant, but I don't have skills in the technical end of it. But if I found somebody who has that technical, where would I find somebody who would have that kind of technical skill?
It depends on what technical expertise you're looking for, right? So if you're building a piece of technology, right? So it could be hardware, it could be software. Hardware often requires software in order to run, right? But if you're talking about technical expertise in terms of like food science, right, you would look someplace else. But your first step is to identify the type of technical expertise that you require, and then to evaluate for yourself how committed or how deep that technical expert needs to be involved in the long-term development of the problem, right? There are some things that you can definitely outsource, right? So you don't need to have the technical expertise maybe to, I don't know, let's say for a restaurant to develop a new food preservation, whatever, chemical for a shelf-stable thing that you're going to make. You can probably consult with somebody once, and they can tell you, well, these are your options, and that's it. You're done with the preservation portion of your product development, right? Because you know that, oh, you can use these chemicals in order to do it or so. But if your entire business is going to be on, customized, shelf-stable pastries for gas stations or something like that, then in the long run, you need to consistently be able to create preservatives for shelf-stable pastries or something like that. You can't just have a one-off chemical that does it. It really depends on what the business model ends up being, right? And in terms of like nuts and bolts of how you might find, technical co-founders, school is actually a great place to do that. But that requires going out and networking and slapping hands, shaking hands, kissing babies, right? It's every single networking event that you can find. Actually, SF Hacks is coming up.
Yes.
Is that PA?
Hacks.
Oh, half.
Yeah, SF Hacks.
Yeah, I'll go into a little bit. SFPACS is essentially like a competition for like software and hardware development. It can be anywhere from like a few hours to like even a few weeks long. And we're hosting our first one here at SFSU since the COVID pandemic in person. It's gonna be in person at Annex 1. Yeah, it's essentially a competition where Annex 1.
Annex.
Annex.
I'm sorry. Make sure to Annex 1, which is right here on campus. Again, it's gonna be our first in-person hackathon since the COVID pandemic. We're trying to put an emphasis on not only trying to find people who know how to build software and hardware, but we're also trying to get people who know business or biology, chemistry, design, whatever, so we can have that mix of skill sets. So if you want to join a hackathon, that would be another great place where you can find people who know how to do all these other skills that you may not have. So that's it for SFPACS.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
great.
there's also a channel on the INE Discord to find co-founders, to like list, what you're looking for, or if you're looking for, a project to work on or so. But you will not be in another time in your life where you have, doesn't feel like it, but where you will have as much free time as you do, and have such close access to a bunch of other smart, passionate people who likewise have a lot of free time. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of innovation and entrepreneurship starts in colleges, is because you run into people who have like-minded passions, and it's easier to find, co-founders in a space where people tend to network and run into each other. That's also one of the reasons why the Innovation Hub exists, is it's a place for people who care about innovation and entrepreneurship to hang out. You use the maker space, and you might run into somebody who, knows technical things that you don't know and that you might need along the way. Yep. And also pitch competition. Like, you can listen in on the pitch competitions, and you may be like, oh my God, that is exactly the type of person that I need on my team or so, right? Or that's an excellent concept. I wonder if they're looking for a co-founder type of thing. Oh. Okay, so you want to prove that you can actually do it. That's usually at this phase, the people around you, right? And the advisors and mentors that you have access to at the same time. It's even better if you can get a prototype going, if you can build some sort of janky prototype. So that will show that you are like halfway there. If you have a patent, right, or if you've conducted some research that has been, peer-reviewed and published, that's another way in which you can kind of show that, yes, it's technically feasible as well. On the proof of concept side, again, it's two pieces. It's that the problem actually exists and that your solution is desirable enough for people and good enough for people where they will buy your concept and pay for it. Okay, the last thing that you need to convince your audience of is why they should care. Why they should care about this problem and that you have a solution to this problem. So again, this depends on who you're making the pitch to.
Who are those people?
Yeah. So the who I should care part, the who is whoever you're pitching to. So you could be pitching to a potential co-founder, right? Why should this potential co-founder care about your idea and join your team? You need to convince them of that, right? Maybe it's a passion project. Maybe they care about the same ethical things that you do or something like that, right? Maybe it's a total money thing, but I do have to say, if you're trying to start a startup purely to make money, you should just go and accept the job offer with Google instead. Your chances are much better over there. Just because the failure rate on startups is so high and the path is so hard because you will be sacrificing. Like these days, it's like, do I write that paper or do I work on, this startup? It's like, do I study for the exam or do I work on my startup? You will be making a lot of sacrifices along the way. And if you are not making those sacrifices, then obviously you don't care enough about the startup to actually pursue it. So if you're trying to do it to get rich, go work for a FANG company, honestly. You have to really be passionate and really care about the problem that you're trying to solve because things will get dark and things will get very desperate. And you want to know upfront that this is something that you actually want to pursue. Okay. So for VCs, to show VCs why they should care is you want to demonstrate to them that there's large market potential. And in order to demonstrate that, you want to show that there is a large venture capitalist, so VC, or any form of investor. You want to show that there is a large addressable market. Because from the VC's perspective, from an investor's perspective, they also realize that it is highly unlikely that your startup is going to succeed or that your idea is going to succeed. So the perspective that they're coming from is, I need to throw money at a lot of different concepts with the expectation that like 99.9% of them are going to fail, but that 0.1% that is going to make it, it's got to make it absolutely huge. And in order for that to make it absolutely huge, it's got to be able to hit a very large market. So they will only invest in concepts that can potentially address a very large market. Because if they spread their investments across multiple medium-sized markets, 99.9% of them are still going to fail. But that 0.1% that actually makes it, if it only makes it in a medium market, it's not going to make up for all those other failed investments that they have. So for an investor, you have to demonstrate that the market is absolutely gigantic and huge, and it's just going to hockey stick. That's on the VC side of things. Angels might be a little bit different because angels literally, they have other metrics that they go by. They have passion projects, they have initiatives that they in particular care about. It could be furthering female entrepreneurs. It could be, helping a local community or something like that, right? It might be a not-for-profit reason that they really care about. They might, care about, minimizing recidivism or something like that. It doesn't have to be a huge market. It just has to be the market that they particularly care about affecting change with also. So you can also think in that scale also, right? Target your presentation and pitch to that particular market as well. Yeah. Okay. So just be cognizant of who you're making the pitch to, and that everybody has a slightly different reason for caring, and you have to demonstrate to them why they should care. Yeah. Okay. In the convincing part, you also have to demonstrate that your team can do it. I talked a little bit about, you showing that the founding team has the skills to be able to do it. You also have to be wary of whether you've chosen what I call a tar pit idea or world peace idea. I already kind of explained what the world peace idea is. You don't need to explain the demand side, but that solvency problem is a problem. Nobody's been able to solve it, right? You need to show that you have some sort of secret sauce, some new insight, or some new way to approach the problem that nobody else has thought of, which, to be frank, is very difficult. And that's why world peace ideas generally don't work.
I don't know if you know something called Opera browser.
Opera? Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
They succeeded quite a lot right now. While they were competing with already made browsers, kind of Google and Safari, how could we explain their success if they redesigned something that was already invented? Like kind of the same thing. Why are they successful?
Yeah. So the question is, Opera, the browser, it rolled out in a relatively crowded space of a whole bunch of other browsers that already existed, right? And so how did they convince people that there was room for yet another browser out there, right? And so what they had to be able to show, and I don't use Opera and I don't know what niche they are inside the market, but what they had to do was to show that there was a problem that existed with all the other browsers that are out there. Something was very unsatisfactory with how other browsers were working. And I don't know what that loophole was for Opera. I don't know if there are software engineers who can articulate that one a little bit better.
Well, me personally, I changed to Opera since they had a RAM limiter.
Okay.
And that helped me while programming, since every time I run a program, it uses a lot of my RAM. I wanted my browser to use less RAM as possible.
Okay, so I can see how that would be a problem because I have a problem with Chrome on that right now, right? And I remember way back when Netscape was getting very bloated. Internet Explorer was getting very bloated also, and that would decrease the performance of my computer, like overall, because the browser running in the background would just suck up all the RAM, right? And so you can argue that maybe there are users and there are companies that they didn't need all the bells and whistles that maybe Chrome had or Safari has. They just wanted some browser that enables them to use all the RAM for other things on their computer that they really cared about at any given time. And so they just needed to show that there were enough of those people and that it was a growing group of people. And that, I guess the urgent part and the frequency part, it definitely exists because you use the browser constantly, and it gets urgent when you have 15 different applications open and everything's getting bogged down because you have the browser open. So I think it's easy enough to demonstrate that there's an opening in a market. You just have to demonstrate what that problem is that needs to be solved and that people are willing to pay for it. If I make the argument of, if I don't solve this problem and I continue to use a bloated browser, then I either have to buy more RAM for all of my computers, and RAM ain't cheap, right? And the labor, my IT folks, to get them to go and gather everybody's computers up on a regular basis to upgrade the RAM, that's not cheap either. So I can now come up with the case for why the existing status quo is expensive as well, starts to make this a more and more compelling problem. So just have to find the angle. Okay. Another part of convincing people, especially as college students, is that you have the ability to do it. Yes, you're in college. Yes, you guys are smart, but it's not like you have a PhD in something and, 50 years of experience in this problem, right? So as a college student, you really have to convince people that you have the ability to do this. You have some insight, right? That will get you over the technical hump of being able to execute on this. The other thing as a college student that you have to convince people of is that you are committed to solving this problem because, you're in college. You kind of have to graduate somehow, right? So which means you're going to be splitting your attention on school, between school and whatever your startup is. So how committed are you? Are you recruiting for another job right now? Are you applying to grad schools right now? Because if you are, that obviously means you are not going to be doing this as a full-time job after you graduate. So you need to show some level of commitment to this also, because it's great to just have an idea, but then if it drops dead the moment you get your job offer from Google, then nobody's going to invest in you. So those are the two pieces that present the biggest challenges for student entrepreneurs. Okay. Proof of concept. I talked a lot about how you might get proof of concept, but this is kind of more timeline or, process of what you might go through in order to get to proof of concept. You have a problem, you come up with what you think might be the solution to the problem, right? You have a hypothesis, essentially, and you're going to go through the scientific method, really, to figure out whether your hypothesized solution to the problem is going to work. So your hypothesis, there are going to be multiple pieces to it. You're hypothesizing that the problem exists, and you're hypothesizing that your solution will do what you think it's going to do, and you're hypothesizing that the solution is actually going to solve the problem that you've identified. Yeah. So is your solution going to work the way that you want it to work? And then is the solution actually going to solve the problem? Those are two very different things, right? So if it relies on some magical algorithm, does the algorithm actually churn out what you expect it to churn out, right? That's one thing you have to prove. And then the second thing is, okay, it churns out what you think it's going to churn out. Now, does that output actually solve the underlying problem that you've identified as your consumers having, right? So come up with those solutions and then you test. So you come up with some sort of minimally viable product, minimally viable service, minimally viable whatever prototype to test your hypotheses, right? You test it out with potential customers. Hey, imagine that this AI algorithm spit out whatever. Would that solve your problem? Or how does that address your problem? And start listening to them. And be open to your great hypothesis, your great solution, not addressing their problems whatsoever. This is the time to find out whether or not your ideas are good ideas before you spent any time or money building out a legit full-on prototype. The last thing you want to do is fully build out this app, fully rent out Amazon server space, buy a bunch of hardware, contract a bunch of coders, and build a whole bunch of stuff only to find out that the algorithm won't work, and that even if the algorithm did work, it doesn't do anything for the customer in the first, anyways. So test it out conceptually with a janky MVP to get some answers and clarity into your hypotheses. Then when you finally get confirmation that, okay, problem exists, okay, technical solution is viable, right? And technical solution actually addresses the problem, then you create a version of your MVP that is repeatable, that can be applied over and over and over again so that you can test it with a wider audience now. This janky little MVP, right? It's not very robust. This is a more robust thing that you can actually test with a bunch of people. So now you're getting a larger sample size. So if you've taken any research methods classes or statistical classes, you know that you want to get larger sample sizes to get better validity on your hypotheses. So you want a minimally repeatable prototype, right? You want that prototype to be repeatedly used at this point. And as you're running trials on this prototype, you can start looking at how people are using it. It doesn't have to be a fully functioning website or an app or something like that, but you want to see how people are using the interface and interacting with it. You want to start learning about how problems are being addressed in this space, right? And whether certain features need to exist, and whether certain additional problems start to arise. Okay. And then when you kind of have a good working prototype at this point, you roll out that prototype to a minimally viable segment. So in the very beginning, right, we talked about your problem exists for a certain target segment. You need to roll that out to a minimally viable version of that segment. So if your segment is like, corporations with poor internal accounting controls or something like that, right? That's a really large market. So maybe you find a sub-segment that you can start testing with. Maybe you have an uncle that works in a certain type of company and they have an accounting division or something like that. Maybe you can roll out your software to that accounting division and see what everybody thinks within that organization or so. So you want to roll out that beta in a controlled manner to see how it actually works with your actual customers. Yeah. What would be awesome is if that first beta customer under that minimally viable segment, if they're willing to pay to use and be the guinea pig at that point, because that demonstrates that the problem is so terrible right now that they're even willing to pay for a beta to help them solve the problem, to address the problem at this point, right? But at this point, you've already gone through several rounds of testing, so this should be relatively functional at this point. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles and functionality that you may have dreamt of. This may not even be version 1.0. It may be version like 0.3 or something like that, right? But it does something, and it does provide some value already to the customer at this point. But you're looking for like a beta customer who's willing to provide feedback and be a part of that iterative process that makes the prototype even better, that initial product even better. Yeah. So this is kind of the process you would go through.
Not necessarily just kind of maybe like an example of what these segments would look like. For example, let's say your audience is like for something for new grads, right? Like potential grads. So maybe the people do the MVP or just like you and the people building it, or maybe you and a few of your family or friends or people on campus. And then with the MRP would then be, okay, you validated that, you iterated over that, you go to the MRP. What is like that next segment? What would be?
So it's meant for students?
Yeah, it's a potential grads.
So potential graduate students or like seniors who are about to graduate. Okay, right. So you've defined who your segment is. The minimally viable one might be, I'm going to test it on, let's say, people in the ethnic studies majors, because they all have similar majors, or maybe I test it out in one major, because I don't know what introducing multiple majors might change about people's perspectives, right? I may want to narrow it down to, I don't know, people who graduate in fall versus people who graduated in spring, who will graduate in spring, because maybe the paperwork's different, maybe the market is somehow different. So I want to try to control as many of the variables as possible. Because at this point, I want to see if the prototype actually works and fundamentally functions the way it's supposed to with the market that I've identified. So that might be the segment. The next version of the segment might be, okay, I'm going to roll it out across all of Cozy, right? For both fall and spring people. And then I see if like my architecture holds up, if whatever I've built can handle that type of volume. And I'm like, okay, seems to be okay. We're going to roll it out to all of San Francisco State. Maybe I roll it out to San Francisco State and Cal State East Bay at the same time, right? Or maybe I try to roll it out to a private institution next because I want to see private school students, public school students. Maybe the administration is different between the two organizations. And so the bureaucracy handles whatever differently also. But you want to slowly start introducing more variables.
Yeah,
Does that make
that's-
sense?
That's.
And I would recommend on the first minimally viable segment to choose a segment that you are very familiar with. It's also a lot easier too, because you're more likely to know people in that segment also. Yeah. Okay. How do you know when you have product market fit? And this would just be like awesome and holy grail stuff if you've reached this point and you can put it into your pitch deck. Is again, you have paying customers and you're pitching because you have overwhelming demand right now. It's just too much for you guys to handle. And in order to handle that demand and take the next step, you're going to need more resources. That would be the best position to be in when you're pitching. Is that's the reason why you're asking. Is there, when you've rolled it out to that minimally viable segment, like everybody and their grandmother is coming and wants to like sign on to your beta. And so faced with this overwhelming demand, you need to hire more coders, you need to buy more server space, yada, yada, yada. You have no money to do it. And that's why I'm pitching to you guys for money. That's the instance that you want to be in. All other things being equal, and it's not quite, on topic for this workshop, is you don't want to have to take money unless you have to take money. Don't raise money and give away equity unless you really have to. So if you can get away with funding everything through existing paying customers, do it. Do it that way and do it on the cheap. But if the next phase for you to really take on is you got to roll out a huge initiative or something like that, and you really need that bump up in cash, you should be facing overwhelming demand before you go and ask for that, next bump up of funding.
How would you say when it's a better decision to try to go after like investor money versus trying to get like a business loan or something like that to help you scale? I don't even know how that would work.
Yeah. This gets into startup finance, and I'll give you guys the fire hose version of it. Is as a startup, it is, number one, very difficult for you to get debt, very difficult for you to borrow. And I have heard stories, successful and very not successful, of people literally funding their startup via credit cards. 29.99% is terrible, and you have to pay that, right? And if you don't, you personally are on the hook for it. Even with a personal loan, with a small business loan, you are guaranteeing it and you are on the hook for it if something doesn't go right. The good news on debt, though, is once you've paid off the debt, you still keep all of the equity and the company is all completely yours. With equity, right, it's somebody else's money, right? So if everything goes to hell in a handbasket, like it's no sweat off your back, it's a little off your reputation, but that's about it, right? It's the investor that's out of their money. But if you do hit it big, then they get a huge cut, right? And it is going to be a huge cut because if they're that early on and you're that desperate for the money, they're going to extract their pound of flesh from you. The other thing is, in either one of those scenarios, like in terms of like holding on to equity and perhaps sacrificing growth at the altar of giving up equity, is if you have no growth and you cannot develop the product or the prototype or the whatever, 100% of zero is still zero, right? So for a lot of entrepreneurs that are doing concepts which require high initial investments, and that's usually like mechanical engineering-ish type of stuff where you need the materials and you need the facilities for it, I highly recommend you find a development partner to work with, who can provide either the materials or the whatever, or the manpower. And, just suck it up and give up the equity, because you all are young. You have time to do a second, a third, a whatever, startup. And if you can prove yourself through on that first one, even if you've given away half the company, right, and you've proven yourself, it's a lot easier for you to get better financing terms the second time around. I would look at the long game in that way. Debt, you can't get it. Number two, if you can get it, it's hella expensive and you're on the hook for it. Highly not recommend. So, yeah. Okay. And then finally, what to do next, right? So say you have to have a call to action on your slides. Think of what you want from the person that, from the people that you're presenting to. Do you want money? Do you want their love? Do you want their followers? Like, do you want their partnership? Do you want them to be your mentor and expert or whatever? Do you want them to recommend somebody? Do you want them to recommend a beta partner to you guys, right? So think about what you want from them, and like just very clearly lay it out. What do you want and what are you willing to give them out there, right? So, sometimes, especially with alumni at the university, they just want to help out students also, right? So if you fish through that, alumni directory and you're like, oh my God, like that person was a alum of San Francisco State, an email. Like you will find that alumni love helping students on campus. And so literally just saying that you're from here really helps. And I will say this, I was very, very surprised when I first came to State is State has been around for so long, and it has been the city's university for so long that you will be shocked at who is an alumni here. It's kind of ridiculous. You may think that, the alumni base here isn't nearly as prestigious as like, Stanford or Harvard or whatever, but this place has been around for so long and has been so easily accessible by everybody that almost everyone has a degree from San Francisco State in some capacity. Undergrad, grad, random classes or whatever, San Francisco State has touched so many different lives. You will be shocked at how many like CEOs, C-level suite people, and founders of large companies have actually gone to school here. Take the time, go to your alumni office and ask them for the type of expert that you need, or come to us. And INE has a great relationship with the Alumni Association. We can help you find the alumni also. And then it's just a matter of reaching out to them and saying like, hey, I'm working on this. I think you have the expertise that I need. Would you mind, helping us out? I don't know, frame it as a student project if you want to also, right? Oftentimes alumni they love to talk. So let them talk. For us, I would love it if you guys applied to Incubator. We're always looking for great concepts. And if you want to learn more about us, we are ine@sfsu.edu. If you just Google INE at SFSU or INE SFSU, you'll come to our webpage and you'll see all the things that we do, links to Incubator and links to other workshops and pitch competitions that we have. And sign up for the Discord because we do post everything onto there. Okie dokie. Yeah, that's it. I'm just going to leave it up for questions for you guys at this point. Hopefully the QR codes still work. Yeah, no. Okay.
I had a question.
Yeah.
Going back to trying to, find a solution, find a problem, and kind of the strategies around that. What about in those situations where, like, let's say you're offering a solution, right? It's not world peace, it's something, but like you're not offering it's not a panacea. It's like, hey, this is a problem. We're not entirely solving it, but we're offering a service to make your experience with that problem
A little bit better.
Yeah, that suckers one.
Is that urgent enough? So one of the ways to evaluate whether the problem and your proposed solution to it is worthy of somebody's time and money and resources is to ask them what they're doing about the problem now. Right? Like, how are they addressing it? If they're just living with it, right, and they seem to be perfectly okay with it, then it's not painful enough. And if you just ameliorate it a little bit, it's definitely not good enough. If they have tried every remedy under the sun and they're still on the search, so this was one of the reasons why, like, lupini milk was palatable, pun intended, is because so many people go through so many different types of milks. They're just cycling through the next new milk because this one doesn't taste right, this one doesn't feel right, this one separates, this one curdles, whatever, right? There's always something wrong with every single alternative, and they're trying all the alternatives. That's when you know that you just have to maybe make some little improvement over some part of that problem, and people will probably try it and be willing to, adopt. It's a slippery slope to be on, only partially solving a problem. That partial piece better be very, very painful in order to make it the customers to make it worthwhile for the customer. Yeah. You don't have to solve everything. You can just make things a little bit better, but that problem better be super painful. Yeah, or even a little bit better is.
Yeah, it is
good.
painful. But what doesn't solve it, at least gives them a modicum of like control.
Honestly, climate change is like that, right? There's not going to be a silver bullet, and it's going to be like 1,000 little cuts that are going to happen to attack, climate change to help solve that problem. You just have to, it's a different convincing story that you're going to have to do, that it's worth the time and effort to make this incremental step. And that's one of the reasons why trying to address climate change is so difficult, is because nobody thinks it's worth it just to do the little bits, and nobody's willing to do anything to do the whole shebang at the same time, and so nothing happens. If your proposed one step forward doesn't seem to be big enough, people just might say, I'm going to wait for the bigger thing to come along next. Like, I see that you can address it in a little bit, but somebody's going to be right around the bend with the bigger solution. Unless they're super desperate for it, right? Unless, this happens with a lot of the eco startups that try to catch plastic waste off of streams and rivers before they even hit the ocean, right? Like, the startups that like fish out all of the plastic from the oceans, that is literally a drop in the bucket type of thing, right? But you can propose that, hey, I will prevent the plastic from even hitting the ocean. The volume of plastics that have been pulled out of the ecosystem are probably the same, right? But the more immediate problem of the plastics, like catching them before they hit into the ocean, it feels like you're doing more because it's a lot more efficient to do it that way. So you can make the argument that you get a bigger bang for your buck there. So the problem doesn't need to be nearly as painful there in order for your solution to show that it's got big results. Whereas if you're dredging the entire ocean to pick up like plastic, you're pushing other reasons, as to why somebody should invest in that project, because it's very intensive for very little gain. Yeah.
So I know that a lot of VCs don't play this, but finding a co-founder actually gives them a lot of room for negotiation on the co-founder, but also for the VCs. I also know that as for, let's say you're doing a software startup, right? The levels of like cycles about like software updates have to be like very, very fast. So I was wondering, what would you recommend, like a contractor or like finding or like waiting to find the right co-founder?
So you already have a piece of software that you need to update regularly at this point, or?
Oh, I don't think so. Not right now, but let's say if I do have one, I feel like this, like the amount of pivots where, the updates. Like, it's like software, right? So you have to keep refining it and make it.
There will
better.
always be bugs, yeah.
Yeah, so, what are your?
And I think I'm gonna need more information on that because are people paying to use, do you have like people paying to use the software right now? Because if they're paying for the software, you know, it's a little bit more urgent to start fixing things, right? And it's more important, I think, to fix things, features that are addressing core problems, which is why somebody bought the piece of software in the first place, than it is to necessarily like roll out other features. So the majority of your time would be on bug fixes. And so in which case you should be doing that in-house anyways, because you want the core to be proved out first before you do anything. If that means finding, like compromising on a co-founder, don't compromise on a co-founder for that reason. Get an employee. Get an employee or get a volunteer to do that, but make sure that you still own the code and understand the code. So like if you can outsource, you know, the bug fixes or so, and you still are responsible for the core of what's being built, then that might be fine, right? But what the co-founder should be doing is bringing something super valuable to the table, right? It shouldn't be another duplicate of you, because you might as well just hire somebody to do that, right? And you can monitor that person and you don't have to necessarily give up as much equity or so. And I would say don't compromise on the co-founder either, because co-founders are very difficult to get rid of.
Yes, exactly.
So be very careful and choose the co-founder because 1 + 1 can equal 3, not because you need 2. So yeah, just be very careful when you choose a co-founder. They should be bringing something else to the table.
Yes, I think that additionally about finding a co-founder, because let's say I have friends, they're very loyal to me, right? But if I were to work with them, it wouldn't be as great. However, if I were to find someone who's technically like, just like perfect, then I don't know if we're gonna share the same idea, let's say even in 3 months, then it would be very difficult to like, let's say get rid of or start a new one on our own.
This is why, oh yeah,
Yeah, if you don't mind me saying so, I think business and pleasure is never a good idea.
yes. Yes.
Yes, I have seen it and experienced it firsthand.
Yeah, it's a dangerous game when you try to co-found something with like your bestie. You will likely not be besties. Yeah. Are you gonna ever find like the perfect co-founder? Probably not. But this is another reason why hackathons are great, right? Class projects are great, right? Like even better class project, right? Is work with somebody through a semester project and you will find out real quick whether, you know, you're going to get along or so. I would say between the two, absolute technical perfection and like, you know, being able to finish each other's sentences because you guys are just on the right wavelength, I would err towards the right wavelength. That's not saying that, you know, you need a yes person or anything like that, but just that you guys have the same core values. That matters more than having absolute technical profession. Yeah. Yay! I'm going to stop recording and I'm going to stop screen share. Okay.